Alright, so if you're still with me after that nice display of entertainment, hopefully that was as entertaining for you as it was for me. Let's delve into chapter 1. Now, see, this is where I think it's kind of ironic. Robert Spencer, on his website called Jihad Watch, claims that he is only trying to expose radical Islam, meaning that when you go to the question answer area of his website, he literally says the question is posed to him, are you trying to just incite bigotry and hatred toward all Muslims and all of Islam? And he says, no, of course not. I am only trying to expose the areas where the radicals get their information. Now, if that was really true, Mr. Spencer, then why is it that your book, besides being called the politically incorrect guide to Islam, not radical Islam, Islam, why do you have the first chapter is called the following? Muhammad, Prophet of War. We'll be continuing with what the other chapters are called as I, go through them. But let's start with chapter 1. Muhammad, Prophet of War. One sentence struck me as interesting. He says that Muhammad and his unique role as a warrior prophet. Really? Last time I checked, Moses, David, Solomon, etc., they were all prophets of war. Did they not fight battles? Did they not, at the behest of God, kill a whole bunch of people, etc.? That one sentence alone just sort of struck me as interesting. Then he mentions, he cherry picks the life of Muhammad. He mentions when he was born, and then he kind of just fast forwards through a lot of events. One thing is he mentions the Quraysh. He says the Quraysh didn't like Muhammad, but he fails to mention why. Now, as a rational reader, when I'm reading a book, when I read a sentence like that, where he says the Quraysh did not like Muhammad, I ask the next question: why didn't they? He doesn't answer that question. He fails to mention the fact that the Meccan Quraysh pagans, persecuted the Muslims. So I don't understand why he left that out. He just chose to leave that one out. You can find that on page 5, by the way. His lack thereof on page 5. Then he talks about that Muhammad got so frustrated that it's in the Quran, Surah 111, verse 1 through 5, where God, is cursing Muhammad's uncle, who, from what I understand from Islamic history, wasn't a very nice guy to begin with. His uncle and aunt. Of course, Spencer doesn't mention his history. He just says that, Muhammad cursed them, or God cursed the uncle and aunt who didn't go along with Muhammad. Then he goes on, he jumps from 610 to 622. So we're fast forwarding now. And he says that Muhammad flees to Medina. And he reduces to all the people living in Medina to, quote, a band of tribal warriors. I love how he just generalizes and just throws all of them into one camp. They're a bunch of warriors, okay? How fitting for the painting that Spencer's trying to paint here. He fails to mention, however, why Muhammad fled. Again, if an author says Muhammad flees from Mecca, why? Why does he? He fails to mention that the persecutions. He just fails to mention that. And then he goes on to the raid of the caravan at Nakhla. And Spencer does not mention the Arabic way of raiding. As far as I know, historically, when Arabs at this time raided each other's caravans, this was not a straight attack. This was not a slaughter, as I'm sure Spencer is trying to paint here. The way it worked is caravans were very long. And the way that people were raided was whoever was raiding you would pick off and basically kidnap in a humorous fashion, in my opinion, some of the camels, some of the goods that were tailed at the end of this caravan. And their goal was not to attack and kill people, it was just to get the goods and get out of there. That was the way that's how the economy worked in some cases back then. But of course, Spencer doesn't mention any of that. He then mentions chapter 2, verse 214 in his book. In this copy of the Quran, it's actually verse 217, that mentions that basically God, I will actually quote it, chapter 2, verse 217, which says, they ask thee concerning fighting in the prohibited month. Say, fighting therein is a grave offense. But grave it is it in the sight of Allah to prevent access to the path of Allah, to deny him, to prevent access to the sacred mosque, and to drive out its members. Tumult and oppression are worse than slaughter. Nor will they cease fighting you until they turn you back from your faith, if they can. And if any of you turn back from their faith and die in unbelief, their works will bear no fruit in this life, and hereafter they will be companions of the fire and will abide therein. Going on to verse 218, those who believed and those who suffered exile and fought and strove and struggled in the path of Allah, they have the hope of the mercy of Allah, and Allah is all-forgiving, most merciful. Now, I would like to point out that Spencer doesn't quote all that. He stops at the tumult is worse than oppression line. But he uses this verse to justify the idea, his opinion, that this verse allows Muslims to ignore already established laws that other people adhere to. When I read that verse, I don't see that. Maybe I'm blind as a bat, but as far as I know, that verse is basically saying that yes, there is this law that exists, there are prohibited months where you can attack people. However, if someone is attacking you, and verbally attacking you, physically attacking you, you have the right to defend yourself. So I don't see how Spencer uses that as a, for Muslims to have a free ticket to ignore all international laws, as I'm sure he's trying to say here. And that, by the way, is on page 7. Then he jumps straight to the Battle of Badr. And here, to his credit, he explains Badr, as far as I can tell, in a correct way, in a non-stretching way here. But page 11, he briefly mentions Muhammad randomly attacking some Jewish tribes. Literally, this is how he describes it. Muhammad just wakes up one morning and says, you know what, I'm going to attack the Jews. And he fails to talk about the history behind why attacking the Jews occurred, the 3 major tribes in Medina. And I'm not really going to get into that. I'm sure if you're Muslim, hell, I'm sure if you know theology or history in general, you know why Muhammad attacked these three major tribes. It was because all 3 tribes were betrayed the Medina covenant, the constitution, that everyone was going to come together as allies no matter what, and these 3 tribes failed at that agreement. Now, Spencer does not try and abolish that idea, so as far as I know, Spencer is aware of this constitution of Medina, and he agrees with it. He just wants to paint this picture that Muhammad suddenly woke up one morning and said, the Jews, I gotta attack the Jews. I don't see that anywhere. Then he jumps to page 12, to the affair of Mahaya and Harahi, and I'm sure I'm butchering those names, please forgive me for that. And Spencer tells us that this was the first Jewish victim. In other words, he quotes Muhammad saying, if you find a Jew, kill him. Okay? And he uses this book right here as his proof. And I'm not going to jump into this event too much, but see, the way Spencer words it, he says that this was the first Jewish victim. What Spencer doesn't tell you, this was the last Jewish victim. Even when you read it in the context of this biography, that verse that quotes Muhammad saying this seems almost random as anything else. Suddenly, Muhammad says this. From a historian's perspective, that seems just a little too random and bipolar. Now, that's besides the point. Spencer says, almost acts like this decree, you saw a massacre of all these Jews. No. After, this is a whole scenario between 2 people, and I encourage all of you to read it. I don't have time to get into it. If anyone wants to ask me a question to expand on this on a personal or on text comments, please, I'll do that, but I have to move on. Then on page 14, he mentions the Battle of Uhud. And I'm actually going to get into the Battle of Uhud on the next part. So thank you for staying tuned in. We'll continue with the Battle of Uhud and how Spencer really stretches and manipulates his facts here. Thank you very much. We'll continue.